Frog had a large farm. When it was time to clear and plant, he went to the village to get help, because it was more than he could handle alone. He asked the people of the village to come to clear his land, for the villagers always helped one another with their crops. All the men of the village came. When they had cleared the land, Frog fed them and thanked them for their help. Then the great crowd of workers left his house. There were so many of them that they formed a line several miles long. "I wonder what else I can do to express my appreciation," Frog said to himself. "I know, I'll shake hands with everyone who is here." He ran to the front of the long line of men and turned around to wait for them. As the first man came to where he stood, Frog grabbed his hands enthusiastically and shouted, "Oh, thank you, thank you." He let go and grasped the hands of the second man and shouted again, "Oh, thank you, thank you." He grabbed the hands of the third man and shouted, "Thank you, thank you." There were some strong men among the workers who, when they shook hands with Frog, squeezed very hard. There were so many of them that after a while Frog's hands became flattened out. After they'd all gone, Frog's hands hurt him from so much shaking, so he went to God to make a complaint. God listened to Frog. He looked at Frog's flattened hands. Finally, after Frog was all through telling about his complaint, God said, "You were a little over-enthusiastic. Hereafter, when you wish to thank a crowd, send a messenger to the village, and he will announce your gratitude." Frog went away. His hands were still flat. Sometimes now, when he looks at them, he says, "Don't shake hands with everybody." Once, near the city of Accra on the Gulf of Guinea, a countryman went out to his garden to dig up some yams to take to market. While he was digging, one of the yams said to him, "Well, at last you're here. You never weeded me, but now you come around with your digging stick. Go away and leave me alone." The farmer turned around and looked at his cow in amazement. The cow was chewing her cud and looking at him. "Did you say something?" he asked. The cow kept on chewing, but the man's dog spoke up. "It wasn't the cow who spoke to you," the dog said. "It was the yam. The yam says leave him alone." The man became angry because his dog had never talked before, and he didn't like his tone besides. So he took his knife and cut a branch from a palm tree to whip his dog. Just then the palm tree said, "Put that branch down." The man was getting very upset about the way things were going, and he started to throw the palm branch away. But the palm branch said, "Man, put me down softly." He put the branch down gently on a stone, and the stone said, "Hey, take that thing off me." This was enough, and the frightened farmer started to run for the village. He met a fisherman going the other way with a fish trap on his head. "What's the hurry?" the fisherman asked. "My yam said leave me alone. Then the dog said listen to what the yam says. When I went to whip the dog with a palm branch, the tree said put that branch down. Then the palm branch said do it softly. Then the stone said take that thing off me." "Is that all?" the man with the fish trap asked. "Is that so frightening?" "Well," the man's fish trap said, "did he take it off the stone?" "Wah!" the fisherman shouted. He threw the fish trap on the ground and began to run with the farmer. And on the trail they met a weaver with a bundle of cloth on his head. "Where are you going in such a rush?" he asked them. "My yam said, leave me alone," the farmer said. "The dog said, listen to what the yam says. The tree said, put that branch down. The branch said, do it softly. And the stone said, take that thing off me." And then, the fisherman continued, "the fish trap said, did he take it off?" "That's nothing to get excited about," the weaver said. "No reason at all." "Oh, yes it is," his bundle of cloth said. "If it happened to you, you'd run too." "Wah!" the weaver shouted. He threw his bundle on the trail and started running with the other men. They came panting to the edge of the river, and they found a man bathing there. "Are you chasing a gazelle?" he asked them. The first man said, "My yam talked at me, and it said, leave me alone. And my dog said, listen to your yam. And when I cut myself a branch, the tree said, put that branch down. And the branch said, do it softly. And the stone said, take that thing off me." The fisherman panted, "And my trap said, did he?" And the weaver wheezed, "And my bundle of cloth said, you'd run too." "Is that why you're running?" the man in the river asked. "Well, wouldn't you run if you were in their position?" the river said. The man jumped out of the water and began to run with the others. They ran down the main street of the village to the house of the chief. The chief's servants brought his stool out, and he came and sat on it to listen to their complaints. The men began to recite their troubles. "I went out to my garden to dig yams," the farmer said, waving his arms. "Then everything began to talk. My yam said, 'Leave me alone.' My dog said, 'Pay attention to your yam.' The tree said, 'Put that branch down.' The branch said, 'Do it softly.' And the stone said, 'Take it off me.' And my fish trap said, 'Well, did he take it off?' the fisherman said. And my cloth said, 'You'd run too,' the weaver said. And the river said the same, the bather said, his eyes bulging." The chief listened to them patiently, but he couldn't refrain from scowling. "Now this is really a wild story," he said at last. "You'd better all go back to your work before I punish you for disturbing the peace." So the men went away, and the chief shook his head and mumbled to himself. "Nonsense like that upsets the community." "Fantastic, isn't it?" his stool said. "Imagine a talking yam." Near the edge of the Liberian rainforest, on a hill overlooking the Cavalli River, was the village of Younde. Its rice and cassava fields spread in all directions. Cattle grazed in the grassland near the river. Smoke from the fires in the round clay houses seeped through the palm-leaf roofs, and from a distance these faint columns of smoke seemed to hover over the village. Men and boys fished in the river with nets, and women pounded grain in wooden mortars before the houses. In this village, with his wife and many children, lived a hunter by the name of Ogalusa. One morning, Ogalusa took his weapons down from the wall of his house and went into the forest to hunt. His wife and his children went to tend their fields and drove their cattle out to graze. The day passed, and they ate their evening meal of manioc and fish. Darkness came, but Ogalusa didn't return. Another day went by, and still Ogalusa didn't come back. They talked about it and wondered what could have detained him. A week passed, then a month. Sometimes Ogalusa's sons mentioned that he hadn't come home. The family cared for the crops, and the sons hunted for game. But after a while, they no longer talked about Ogalusa's disappearance. Then one day, another son was born to Ogalusa's wife. His name was Puli. Puli grew older. He began to sit up and crawl. The time came when Puli began to talk, and the very first thing he said was, "Where is my father?" The other sons looked across the rice fields. "Yes," one of them said, "where is father?" "He should have returned long ago," another one said. "Something must have happened. We ought to look for him," a third son said. "He went into the forest, but where will we find him?" another one asked. "I saw him go," one of them said. "He went that way across the river. Let us follow the trail and search for him." So the sons took their weapons and started out to look for Ogalusa. When they were deep among the great trees and vines of the forest, they lost the trail. They searched in the forest until one of them found the trail again. They followed it until they lost the way once more, and then another son found the trail. It was dark in the forest, and many times they became lost. Each time another son found the way. At last they came to a clearing among the trees, and there on the ground, scattered about, lay Ogalusa's bones and his rusted weapons. They knew then that Ogalusa had been killed in the hunt. One of the sons stepped forward and said, "I know how to put a dead person's bones together." He gathered all of Ogalusa's bones and put them together, each in its right place. Another son said, "I have knowledge too. I know how to cover the skeleton with sinews and flesh." He went to work, and he covered Ogalusa's bones with sinews and flesh. A third son said, "I have the power to put blood into a body." He went forward and put blood into Ogalusa's veins, and then he stepped aside. Another son said, "I can put breath into a body." He did his work, and when he was through, they saw Ogalusa's chest rise and fall. "I can give the power of movement to a body," another one said. He put the power of movement into his father's body, and Ogalusa sat up and opened his eyes. "I can give him the power of speech," another son said. He gave the body the power of speech, and then he stepped back. Ogalusa looked around him. He stood up. "Where are my weapons?" he asked. They picked up his rusted weapons from the grass and gave them to him. They then returned the way they had come, through the forest and the rice fields, until they had arrived once more in the village. Ogalusa went into his house. His wife prepared a bath for him, and he bathed. She prepared food for him, and he ate. 4 days he remained in the house, and on the 5th day he came out and shaved his head, because this was what people did when they came back from the land of the dead. Afterwards he killed a cow for a great feast. He took the cow's tail and braided it. He decorated it with beads and cowrie shells and bits of shiny metal. It was a beautiful thing. Ogalusa carried it with him to important affairs. When there was a dance or an important ceremony, he always had it with him. The people of the village thought it was the most beautiful cowtail switch they had ever seen. Soon there was a celebration in the village because Ogalusa had returned from the dead. The people dressed in their best clothes. The musicians brought out their instruments, and a big dance began. The drummers beat their drums, and the women sang. The people drank much palm wine. Everyone was happy. Ogalusa carried his cowtail switch, and everyone admired it. Some of the men grew bold and came forward and asked for the cowtail switch, but Ogalusa kept it in his hand. Now and then there was a clamor and much confusion, as many people asked for it at once. The women and the children begged for it too, but Ogalusa refused them all. Finally he stood up to talk. The dancing stopped, and people came close to hear what Ogalusa had to say. "A long time ago I went into the forest," Ogalusa said. "While I was hunting, I was killed by a leopard. Then my sons came for me. They brought me back from the land of the dead to my village. I will give this cowtail switch to one of my sons. All of them have done something to bring me back from the dead, but I have only one cowtail to give. I shall give it to the one who did the most to bring me home." So an argument started. "He will give it to me," one of the sons said. "It was I who did the most, for I found the trail in the forest when it was lost." "No, he will give it to me," another son said. "It was I who put his bones together." "It was I who covered his bones with sinew and flesh," another said. "He will give it to me." "It was I who gave him the power of movement," another son said. "I deserve it most." Another son said it was he who should have the switch, because he had put blood in Ogalusa's veins. Another claimed it because he had put breath in the body. Each of the sons argued his right to possess the wonderful cowtail switch. Before long, not only the sons, but the other people of the village were talking. Some of them argued that the son who had put blood in Ogalusa's veins should get the switch. Others, that the one who had given Ogalusa breath should get it. Some of them believed that all of the sons had done equal things, and that they should share it. They argued back and forth this way until Ogalusa asked them to be quiet. "To this son I will give the cowtail switch, for I owe most to him," Ogalusa said. He came forward and bent low and handed it to Puli, the little boy who had been born while Ogalusa was in the forest. The people of the village remembered then that the child's first words had been, "Where is my father?" They knew that Ogalusa was right, for it was a saying among them that a man is not really dead until he's forgotten. Once there was a boy named Todo who lived in the grass country north of Kumasi in Ashanti. He had to care for his father's cattle, and day after day he took them to the watering places and watched them graze. His father's herd had many cows and only one bull, but it was the largest bull in all Africa. Its name was Only One. Whenever a bull calf was born, Only One would kill it, for he thought one bull was enough for his herd. One time a bull calf was born, and Todo liked him very much. Only One didn't know about the calf yet, so Todo carried him away into the bush country and hid him. Every day he crept back to the herd to get milk for the calf from its mother. The old bull, Only One, was getting suspicious about things, so when the calf was a little bigger, Todo took him far into the back country. The calf grew up. When he was 4 years old, he was almost as big as Only One. Then Todo took him to a great rock that lay in the middle of the plains and said, "You look like a bull, and you act like a bull, but you aren't full grown until you're strong enough to move this rock." The bull put his head down and pushed against the great rock, but nothing happened. "You're too young. You're still a calf," Todo said. "Wait another year." The young bull was so provoked because he couldn't move the rock that he pawed the ground with his foot. He pawed so deep and wide that a lake came up, and that was Lake Burro. The next year the boy took his bull to the rock again and said, "Put your horns to it and try again." The young bull put his head down and tried to toss the great rock, but it didn't budge. "You're too young yet," Todo said. "You're not grown up." The bull was so angry, he put one horn in the ground and charged through the bush, plowing a deep furrow. He plowed so deep and far that water came up and began to flow, and that was the Adifofu River. They waited another year, and again Todo said, "You're bigger now. Put your horns to the rock and push it." The bull put his head down, and he pushed so hard his eyes got red and white foam came out on his hide, but the rock didn't move. He was so angry that he ran into the forest, tearing down all the trees for miles around. This was the great hurricane that Ashanti people still talk about. Another year came, and the boy said to his bull, "Try again." This time the bull dug his feet in, and his muscles bulged, and the rock swayed a little. "Next year you'll do it," Todo said. But the bull was unhappy. He bellowed, and down in Kumasi it sounded like thunder, and the people ran for shelter. The next year the bull was 8 years old, and his horns were as thick as the trunk of a baobab tree. "Try it again," Todo said. The bull tried the rock gently with his horns. Then he went a mile away across the flat grasslands. He pawed the ground, and then he began to run. He charged across the plains with his head down low and struck the great rock in the middle. It smashed into many pieces and flew into the air in all directions. Wherever the pieces fell, they became the mountains of Africa. "Now you are ready," Todo said. "Your name is Throw Mountains. Let us go find Only One." They went out of the bush country to the place where his father's herd pastured. The cows were greatly surprised. Then Only One came. "I am Only One," the old bull said. "Who are you?" "I am Throw Mountains," the young bull said, "and you are not the only one any more." Only One became angry, and he put his head down and pawed the ground. Then Throw Mountains put his head down and pawed the ground. They pawed so much earth they made a sandstorm that blew down to the coast and out to sea. They put their horns together and began to struggle. They trampled down a place 100 miles wide where nothing will grow anymore because they packed the earth so hard. Their breath came so hot that the palm trees wilted. They separated and then came together with such a crash that people thought cannons were shooting somewhere. Only One spread his legs and tossed with his great horns, and Throw Mountains went flying into the air. He fell with a thump, and the place he landed became the deep hollow near Batuta. Throw Mountains got to his feet and shook himself. The two bulls rushed together again, and this time Throw Mountains threw Only One with a powerful toss of his thick neck. Twisting and turning, the old bull passed before the face of the setting sun, and the people in the east thought it was an eclipse. When Only One finally came to earth, he fell on the northern mountains, and he flattened them. And it is through this flat country that traders make their way to Kumasi from Timbuktu. Throw Mountains became the chief of the herd, and there was no more killing of bull calves when they were born. And so it is that now sometimes, before a storm, all the old cattle run and buck and jump like calves. This is because, like far-off thunder, they hear the distant bellowing of the great bull Only One. Once in the country of Akim, in the hills far back from the coast, there was a man named Younde. He was a simple man who had never been far from home, and he spent his time at farming and hunting like other people of the village. He'd often heard talk about the big town of Accra by the ocean, and all the wonderful things to be found there, but he'd never seen it. He'd never been farther from his village than the river. But one day Younde had to go to Accra. He put on his best clothes and took his knife and put it in his belt. He wrapped some food in a cloth and put it on his head and started out. He walked for many days, and the road was hot and dusty. He came closer and closer to Accra. There were many people and donkeys on the way, all going to town or coming back from town. More people than he'd ever seen on the road before. Then he saw a great herd of cows grazing by the edge of the road. He'd never seen so many cows in his life. He stopped and looked at them in wonder. He saw a little boy herding the cows, and he went up to him and said, "Who is the owner of all these cattle?" But the boy didn't understand Younde, because Younde spoke Akim, while in Accra they spoke the Ga language. And he replied, "Minu," which meant, "I don't understand." Minu, what a rich man he must be to own so many cows, Younde said. He continued his way into the town. He was very impressed with everything he saw. He came to a large building and stopped to look at it. It was made of stone, and it was very high. He shook his head. There was nothing like this back in the hills. When a woman came by on her way to market, Younde spoke to her. "What a tremendous house," he said. "What rich person owns such a building?" But the woman didn't know what Younde was saying, because he talked Akim, and she knew only Ga. So she replied to him, "Minu." "Minu, that man again?" Younde was overcome. No one back in Akim had ever been so wealthy as Minu. As he went farther and farther into the town, he kept seeing more wonders. He came to the market. It covered a space larger than all the houses in Younde's village. He walked through the center of it and saw the women selling things that were rare in his village, like iron pots and iron spoons. "Where do all these things come from?" Younde asked a little girl. She smiled at him. "Minu," she replied. Younde was silent. Everything was Minu. Minu everywhere. Younde had never seen so many people in one place. The stories he'd heard about Accra hadn't done it justice. He stopped an old man with a drum under his arm and said, "So many people, all at one time. What makes so many people all come to Accra?" "Minu," the old man said. Younde was overwhelmed. What influence that Minu had! People came to Accra in great crowds just because of him. How ignorant folks back in the village were of this great personage. He went out of the market down to the ocean's edge. Lying in the water were many little fishing boats with sails, the first Younde had ever seen. "Why, to whom do all those boats belong?" he asked a fisherman standing on the beach. "Minu," the fisherman replied. Younde walked away and came to where a large iron cargo ship was being loaded with palm oil and fruit. Smoke came out of its stacks in huge black clouds, and hundreds of men swarmed over its decks. "Ha!" Younde said in great excitement to a man carrying a stalk of bananas on his head. "This must be the largest boat in the world." "Minu," the man said. "Yes, I know. That much I guessed," Younde said. "But where is all the fruit going?" "Minu," the man said, and went up onto the deck of the ship. Younde was overcome. Minu was indeed a great man. He owned everything. He ate everything. You couldn't ask a question but what people would answer, "Minu." Minu here, there, everywhere. "I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it," Younde said. "They ought to call Accra Minu's town. How wonderful it would be to have Minu's great wealth." Younde then transacted his business in Accra, and again he wrapped food in his cloth and set it on his head and started out for home. When he came to the edge of the town, he saw a great procession and heard the beating of drums. He came close and saw it was a funeral. Men were carrying a coffin, and women were crying out in mourning. It was the most impressive funeral Younde had ever seen. He pushed his way into the crowd, and to one of the mourners he said, "Who is this person who has died?" And the mourner replied sadly, "Minu." "What? The great Minu dead?" Younde said. "The man who owned the cattle and the tall house, the sailing boats and the iron steamship? The man whose reputation has crowded the marketplace beyond belief? Oh, poor Minu. He had to leave all his wealth behind. He has died just like an ordinary person." Younde continued his way out of the city, but he couldn't get the tragedy of Minu from his mind. "Poor Minu," he said over and over again. "Poor Minu."